So, welcome to our discussion today on building new solidarities in a changing world of work. I'm Maria Mexi, Research Fellow at the Albert Hessman Center of Democracy, and I'm joined by Thorben Albrecht. Thorben is the Policy Director of IG Metall, the German metal workers trade union. Thorben is an internationally acknowledged expert on the future of work and has been a member of the Global Commission on the Future of Work, established by the International Labour Organization, while from 2014 to 2018, he was a permanent state secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs. Among his most important legislative projects has been the introduction of a statutory minimum wage in Germany, and he also launched the Work 4.0 dialogue, a public dialogue of the Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs on the future of work. And his career also includes working for the Social Democratic Party of Germany as general manager and for the German Trade Union Confederation. So, welcome, Thorben. So nice to have you with me today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you very much, Maria.
Okay, so let me start off with the first question, discussing a little bit the impact of the pandemic crisis. So now we are in year 2 of the pandemic, and our working patterns and lives have changed considerably. Just to give a couple of data, according to ILO's latest estimates, the crisis has resulted in a global loss of 8.8% of working hours, which is actually equivalent to 255 million full-time jobs globally in 2020. Now, there are certain groups, women, young people, workers in low-skilled jobs, that have been hit harder than other groups. Against this background, Thorben, what are the main the policy challenges in your view, and what role can policy actors, especially governments and social partners, play in addressing them?
Yeah, I think the major challenge we are facing really is to build a sustainable growth model and social model after the crisis. As you said, we have seen a lot of job losses, and especially the most vulnerable groups on the labor markets have been affected very hard. So we really need a growth model that is sustainable, both in a way to tackle climate change, so in an ecological way, but also in a social way. And I think what the job of governments in this situation now is to be active and to have active government in the field of innovation, to find new ways of production and producing goods and come to reduction of carbon issuing. Apart from the innovation, I think this is only possible if the states are ready to invest into the economy and into a sustainable economy. And also, of course, the state has to be active in the field of the welfare state, because we have seen that countries with a stable, established welfare state system, good health system, have been much less affected by the effects of the pandemic than states that lag behind when it comes to social security and welfare measures. And when it comes to trade unions and workers' representatives, I think the pandemic has shown that trade unions need to, at the same time, broaden and strengthen workers' voice, because where workers had a say in setting up schemes, for example, for reduction of working time without sacking people, without redundancies, they could play a crucial part to avoid unemployment. But also we have seen that obviously the most vulnerable groups have not been represented enough by trade unions and other workers' representatives. So I think trade unions have to broaden also their scope, looking at non-standard forms of employment to the especially vulnerable groups on the labor market more than they did in the past, to really represent all kinds of workers in the future.
I think this is a very important point, also in relation to the changing working patterns we are seeing nowadays. So with the pandemic and the growth of remote work, we are seeing that the nature of work per se, it's changing. It's increasingly becoming more fluid, more flexible, detached from location and detached from notions of time, I would say. So for some, the post-pandemic future of work is going to be increasingly hybrid. I know that big companies are now preparing for a hybrid future of work. In your view and from your own experience, is hybrid work the new normal? Is it the next big disruption? And if so, are workers and trade unions ready for hybrid work?
I think a more hybrid world of work will be the future, but it's still open whether this means less security for workers, flexibility only for employers and businesses, or if we find a new equilibrium that takes into account also workers' rights, workers' needs for protection, and also the flexibility needs workers have, because when they need flexibilities for their families to make work and life fit together, that might be a different form of flexibility than some of the employers and businesses are looking for. Mm-hmm. And of course, the question whether this hybrid forms of work means that people are still employed in companies, or whether you just take people aboard for short tasks for a short period of time and not taking over any responsibility for them, as some employers tend to do and some platforms tend to do. I think this is also a part of the regulation that is needed, and the task for the trade unions also to represent this kind of new workers and make sure that they have protection, decent pay, etc. as well.
And what is the situation in Germany, actually?
In Germany, we have...
Do you see a tendency towards hybrid work models?
Well, what we have seen during the pandemic is that remote work, work from different places, especially from home, has increased a lot. Mm-hmm. And we can already see that some employers want to take this into the future. Some workers do want this too, but the models have, in many cases, still have to be worked out how it really works in the future. Mm-hmm. And we could also at least imagine that a lot of employers are already thinking about outsourcing or even offshoring parts of administrative work that can be done remote to people that are no longer employed by their companies and might no longer be working and living in Germany, because if something can be done from a suburb, it can also be done from a different country or continent. So I think this is a danger which is very often still underestimated, this danger of outsourcing and even offshoring of work, as companies in the pandemic seen that this kind of flexibility is technically possible, and then now they are thinking about their business models and employment schemes as well.
And this is a very important point. And also the fact that you mentioned platforms, outsourcing or offshoring via platforms. And we have seen that the platform economy, or the so-called gig economy, has been growing in the last decade. And probably this is a trend that is going to continue as more people get into the gig economy, because the gig economy offers them flexibility, offers them supplementary incomes. But at the same time, gig workers in several countries are still deprived of basic labor protections, while the challenges surrounding freedom of association, the effective recognition of their right to collective bargaining are considerable. And I know that you have been working a lot in the area of the gig economy. So I would like to ask you, how can we ensure that gig workers build voice and exercise collective agency in the gig economy? And more broadly, when it comes to collective bargaining in the gig economy, how can we make the most of collective bargaining, given that gig workers and non-standard workers more broadly are generally underrepresented by trade unions in several countries, and given that platform companies, especially the big ones, are reluctant to come to the negotiation table?
Yes, I think there's a whole set of issues, really, and we've we can see that there are different kinds of platforms. We have seen a growth during the pandemic of food delivery platforms that deliver food either from restaurants but also from supermarkets or shops to customers. And of course, the whole internet commerce has been growing when the shops were closed in the streets. But we can also see that a lot of even high-skilled jobs are more and more going to platforms when it comes to coding, when it comes to design, when it comes to consultancy work as well. And so this is a growing part of the economy. So I think there are different answers to that. One is we have to make sure if people are merely instruments of a platform, like people riding what was called a taxi in the past, now it is a ride share or ride hail or food delivery. I think these are the platforms where we really have to make sure that people working for this kind of platforms, they are employees. They need the full rights that a normal worker has, including, of course, the right to collectively organize and go to collective bargaining issues, go on strike and work out collective bargaining agreement, as well as the legal protections like sick pay and other social security benefits. Then we have also platforms where I would say, yes, probably the people working there, they are self-employed, they are freelancers, they are not part of a company that is built up by the platform. But here again, and that's what we're doing also as IG Metall, trade unions have to reach out and say, well, you might be self-employed, you might be independent workers, but you have more voice, especially against a huge platform when you work together collectively. We have one example of people that make part of their living by posting videos on YouTube, for example. And we organized them because, of course, YouTube as a platform has a major market power against the people who upload videos, and they have been changing the conditions. YouTube has been changing the conditions, the pay people get when they upload videos, and they get this recognition there. So we said, well, people have to unite and to get a voice against platforms like YouTube and other platforms there. So the issue of collective action is also an issue when people are independent contractors. So I think we also need some kind of regulation that makes sure that if platforms organize labor in one way or the other, they have some responsibility for the people working on their platforms, and they have to make sure that either the platforms themselves give some social protections to the people that are working on the platforms, or that they are customers who, in a way, through the platform, hire people for gig jobs, that they take on responsibility for the people working for them.
So you mentioned that as a trade union, you have tried to reach out to gig workers, right? Have they responded?
Yes, we have people that are organized through the IG Metall, and there are some other trade unions in Germany who do so as well, because we see with this sector growing, it is important to reach out to these people. It might be a different way of contacting them than just being on the shop floor, but we can also there see that there are, of course, mixed ways. For example, during the pandemic, we had a huge collective bargaining negotiation going on in the metal sector in Germany. Mm-hmm. And of course, to the people working from home, we also had to reach out in a different way than before. We could not just go to their offices and distribute leaflets, but we have to distribute leaflets through the internet, through email, to the people working at home. So the way we reach out to people in normal companies and the way to reach out to people working on platforms is also coming closer together, because we also have in the traditional fields, at least when it's not about production on the shop floor, but people working in offices or remote, this is, we have to reinvent ourselves there too. And that enables us also to reach out better to people working on platforms, because we also go to them speak to them, try to organize them through technical means like blackboards in the internet, emails, etc.
This is a very important point. And also, but in the gig economy, we have two types of work actually. On location type, so you mentioned ride-hailing activities, but also we have crowd work. And we know that you mentioned already that global outsourcing facilitated by crowd work platforms is quite growing. And we're seeing that more and more companies, at the global level, they are relying on freelance labor, which they draw from different regions and different occasions. Now, I know that you have argued on several occasions that the actions needed to manage this change in global outsourcing would require stronger international cooperation, cross-border social dialogue, and then effective global international governance system of digital platforms. What are the key elements of that system, Thorben? And do you see any feasible prospects for its establishment at this stage and its institutional sustainability longer term?
I think first we have a necessity here. We need some international regulations, because on a platform the platform might be located in California. You have people in India working for customers in Europe, companies in Europe when it comes to crowd work. So you have Indian legislation, European legislation, American legislation, and we have to find some ways to have some common standards there. And I think this is important, that we have some kind of international regulations there. And if you ask me if this is possible, of course, first we need political will to do so. And I think this debate is starting now. And I can see, at least in the European Union, there's a growing understanding that we need some also cross-border regulation, at least inside Europe. But when it comes to global level, it might be more complicated, of course. And there are very often people argue that is simply not possible, because you have these different legislations, different countries you're talking about. But I think an international regulation, like an international labor organizations ruling on crowd work, is possible. And I've been inspired actually by the Maritime Labor Convention, Convention for Seafarers, where you have also ship companies that might sit even in Switzerland, where there's no sea to see, and you have crews coming from all over the world and harbors that where the ships are loaded and unloaded throughout the world. And that was also possible, to find some common rules on an international level through an ILO convention, to have some minimum standards. And I think this is also possible for crowd work. And then we have to talk about, of course, decent pay for people working on crowd works. We have to talk about fairness of treatment through the platforms. We have to talk about transparency of the rules on the platforms, as well as the right here again to organize. And this, of course, means organize through the means of the platform, because the platform is connecting all the people being active there. So they have to have the possibility to use the platform. We in Germany very often talk about digital access to workers. And that is true for workers working remotely for a company, like we've seen in the pandemic. We need a digital access for trade unions there, but we also need a digital access to labor platforms. So that will be another issue. For this kind of international standards, I think we have to establish.
Do you see any possibility for having a kind of global collective bargaining, like in the maritime sector?
I think that is at least what we should be aiming for, because I'm still convinced that the social partners, employers, organizations, trade unions, they know best how the real situation is, how a solution and a conflict resolution what it could look like. And I think it's always better if the social partners agree amongst themselves than to have the legal regulation. But sometimes you need the threat of some legal action to get the social partners to the negotiation table. Of course, the problem with the platforms is that you have three parties here, and very often only two are visible. That is the platform and the people working for the platform. And so you have to, in a way, convince or force platforms to come to the negotiation table by saying, well, we can take collective action. We can also take public action talking about the quality of platforms. And that is what is done by some organizations already in some countries. And you also have to find a way to make the customers of the platform responsible and being willing to talk about things as well. So if let's say, a machine company in Germany sources out some coding through a platform, this company is very often not visible. But I think we have to find some ways, and I think there's some regulation going on about due diligence and supply chains already, but of course there are also reputation risks. I mean, if a company sources out through a platform and then the press finds out that child labor is involved or forced labor is involved, these companies do have a problem. And I think these arguments might help to convince companies that they have to really look into the quality of their outsourcing along the supply chain. And also, of course, if they source out labor through platforms, they have to look at the quality of platforms. And this is an argument I do experiment might sometimes be the stronger argument to come to some codes of conduct on labor platforms. So if not only the worker side is demanding this kind of codes of conduct, but also the other customer side, this can put some pressure on the platforms for them to agree to talk about what are some standards we have to have on our platforms.
You have been member of the Global Commission on the Future of Work established by the International Labour Organization. So do you see, do you recommend, actually, do you suggest that the ILO should step into and take some action in this area?
Yes, and it's not only me. I was the one who had this idea with the Maritime Labour Convention, but the whole Commission put it into the paper that the ILO could get some inspiration out of that, and that we need some kind of framework. I think that was what was in the report then, some kind of framework to regulate platforms internationally. My idea, of course, would be an ILO convention on platforms. And I think the Global Commission's recommendations went into this direction. And I know that it's very hard in the ILO bodies to really go into that direction, but maybe it just takes some more years. I mean, yes. Modern seafaring started, I think, in the 19th century with the models we have now, and it took nearly 100 years. I hope it goes a bit quicker with the platforms, but it might take some time. But in the Global Commission, and there was a very diverse commission with CEOs of large companies and labor lawyers and scientists, politicians, trade unionists, we all agreed that we need some kind of regulations here for this kind of platforms.
Excellent. So let me now take you back to the issue of hybrid work, also in relation to the growth of platform and gig work. Both types of working patterns, you've already mentioned that, reduce opportunities for interaction among workers. And this, of course, poses certain challenges to the kinds of collective action that can be pursued in order to claim workers' rights in the workplace. And I think this also threatens the voice of workers in society overall. You mentioned that the gig workers often labor independently, in isolation, with crowd work. We've seen that they do this over geographically expansive areas and in direct competition with one another. So the question is that now that there's a tendency towards hybrid work and gig work, how can workers build voice and especially solidarity in such kind of working alone context?
Yeah, of course, it's more difficult to do than when you are working next to your colleague in a production line. But of course, also there we have seen that there's some kind of competition between workers working for the same company in different countries with different wage levels, etc. And of course, they are also always dependent whether some kind of production is given to this factory in country A or to another country factory in country B. So I think this question of solidarity and competition has been always around. And I think there are some common interests people have when they work on a platform. It's probably not the hourly pay, but it's fair treatment by platforms is something we see that is very important to gig workers on platforms all around the world. And I think there are some common interests. And of course, theoretically, even strikes are possible on labor platforms. Here again, we have seen in our collective bargaining round that people went on strike when they were working from home. I mean, you can switch off your computer, you can put it up and a message in your inbox of your email saying, I'm on strike. And similar action, of course, is more difficult, but also possible on platforms. Plus, of course, platform workers can go public and can communicate into the communities, into society about the problems. And I think this can be also a very powerful tool. We have seen this in Germany in the food delivery service where people just made public the working conditions. Or we've now seen a press report about how many data is collected about a food delivery rider who is tracked every 20 to 30 seconds. And there are about one bicycle driver for this company. They had more than 1 million data points a year, which is definitely illegal in the European Union. So I think these cases can be made public and pressure can be growing through this way. And we see more and more that I think there are two trends at the moment. One is that gig workers are self-organizing in new organizations. And as I said before, trade unions are also reaching out to this new types of workers. And I think combined, this can really give gig workers a voice.
That's an excellent point, actually, I think. And you have also been working in the area of artificial intelligence. What do you see as major opportunities or challenges there in the post-pandemic era?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes it's not really yet to tell, because what use of artificial intelligence will really come into practice in the future, I think it's not very clear to see. We can see a lot of use in customers' relations work with chatbots, etc. We can also see in the human resources departments some use of artificial intelligence, and of course when it's connecting machines in an interconnected production area. And I think the possibilities there, of course, is to make some work processes much more effective, and also to maybe reduce, or let's put it that way, to put human labor to the human core again. I mean, if I look at a care worker and how much documentation they have to do in a hospital or in an elderly home, and people did not become care workers because they want to do documentation, but they wanted to work on care issues. And there, I think artificial intelligence can help to do some of the rather standard work, which is boring and repetitive. Their artificial intelligence can really help to make things easier and to concentrate on the more creative, more human parts of work. But of course, there are dangers as well. I mean, we really have to decide what kind of decisions we want to give to artificial intelligence. And this has to be answered in all fields, from autonomous driving cars, but of course also up to the workplaces. And I think we talked a lot about platforms. There, I'm sure that artificial intelligence mechanism algorithms are in fact deciding about if people get access to work on a platform, and also if they sacked from the platform.
Algorithms. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is done by algorithms. And I think we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to do this? And in official employment context in Germany, that would not be allowed, but in other countries it might. And maybe we have to clarify that very important decisions about if people are hired, if people are fired, what kind of workload is given to people. Do we really want to give this completely to algorithms? Or do we say there we need humans to decide about human lives, and human working lives, of course, is part of their lives as well. So I think there we need some regulation too, making sure that there are limits to the use of artificial intelligence. And again, we need a workers' voice there as well. We need some rights of workers' representation being able to co-decide, as we call it in Germany, about the use of these techniques. And this is, of course, challenging because usually if you, in the past, you had some new technological instrument, you could take a look at it, what is it doing, you could try it out for 2 weeks, and then you could say, well, it's okay to use it or not, or you have to delete this kind of data, and then it's fine. But with artificial intelligence, there's learning and changing itself. You have to monitor all the time. And I think this is a new challenge as well for workers' representatives and for regulators, because they have to learn with the technology learning.
Do you see any prospects for European legislation in this area at this stage?
Well, there are about artificial intelligence. There are first drafts now of legislation on the European level, but what is lacking there is to look at certain areas that need some special attention. And the world of work is one which is lacking in the legal proposal by the European Commission, as well as some other fields probably. So we have to make sure that these different aspects are taken into account, because of course, at a workplace, you always have a difference in power between the management and the worker. And so if artificial intelligence comes in, maybe we need some special provisions there that we do not need in some other fields. We also say in the health system, we need some special provisions. We definitely need it when it comes to military or weaponry use combined with artificial intelligence. So we really have to look at different fields, what requirements should be there for artificial intelligence. And this also includes the world of work.
Okay, excellent. I think with this remark, we can close this discussion, unless you want to add something in relation to your future plans and IG Metall. What are your next priorities in the post-pandemic era?
Well, we are facing serious transformations, and we really have to shape them. And they very often intertwine. We can talk about a twin transformation when it comes to a carbon-free economy on the one hand side and a more digital economy on the other hand side. To give you one example, if you buy a car nowadays, it's more or less built around a combustion engine. And of course, we need to change the cars into electric and carbon-free cars in the future. But the car of the future will not be built around an electric engine. It will be built around a computer, which is steering the car, which is connecting the car to the internet and to other apps, etc. And the electric engine will be only part of this computerized digital system. So we're moving from a combustion engine car to a computer car while we're moving to a carbon-free car. So I think these transformations that are there and that are affecting the kind of jobs we have, the kind of qualifications we have, to make sure that and to go beyond the IG Metall world of work. Of course, we also have a change more into growing importance of care work, of education, etc. So we have to make sure that the quality of jobs, decent jobs, as it's called on the international level, or good jobs, or good work, as we say in Germany, which is a bit more than just decent, but having a collective agreement, having some flexibility when it comes to working times as well. How to make sure that we have good work in the future in the different fields, from care work to new industrial jobs. I think this is the main challenge, and that has a lot to do with digitalization, even if digitalization and the technology itself might not be the driving force, but some others like decarbonization might be the driving force. But we have to really use digitalization to improve quality of work, and we have to find ways to avoid the dangers we've also seen through a more digital world of work, like we talked before.
Thank you for this point. And if I am to sum up, I think that two clear messages are coming out. First, that climate issue and climate change is becoming a huge labor issue, and this is what you mentioned actually. And the second is that there are clear connections between, I think, emerging hybrid work models and gig work. And on-demand and gig work is expected to increase as employers adopt more flexible ways to rebuild their workforces in the post-pandemic era. And the question is how we manage this change, as you mentioned. And for sure, we want to avoid the future in which change comes at the expense of creating winners and losers. And the way to do this is by keeping our social model fit for purpose and setting in place strong national and global frameworks for social dialogue and collective bargaining, as you mentioned, Thorben. And this, of course, all part of a wider strategy to further democratize the workplace. And I think this is the biggest challenge in the post-pandemic era, and to further democratize the future of work. So thank you indeed, Thorben, for these valuable insights, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you.